again. A nation once again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this short podcast from the Independent Activist, live from Belfast. I'm going to talk about really kind of my impression of what's happened in Syria. It's a very black day for the resistance, I must say. Syria was the conduit for ammunition supplies from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon, but also further afield to the resistance fighters in both the West Bank and in Gaza. So, as that supply of support dries up, that's going to make things increasingly more difficult for those who are trying to resist the Israeli expansion plan within West Asia and the Greater Israel project. If we look back not over the last 10 days, but maybe over the last 10, 15 years, we go back to 2011 in Syria when there was a supposed people's rising against the government of Bashar al-Assad. You pick any country in the world, there are 500,000 homeless people in America. There are hundreds of thousands of Americans every year who file for bankruptcy because they cannot pay for their medical services through their paid for privatized healthcare system. There are people with two jobs who cannot make ends meet. And there is a huge drug epidemic throughout the country focused on the poor. We've all seen videos of people like zombies lying in the street or hunched up in a doorway. And there are reasons and grounds in every country for disaffection and dissatisfaction with the government stroke regime in charge. Now, if someone went to America and told the homeless people the reason why they're homeless is because there are oligarchs, millionaires, and billionaires who are hoarding all the money for themselves and allowing the infrastructure in America to fall apart, allowing the social fabric of society to fall apart, to leave no real safety net for those who have mental health issues, for those who have medical health issues, for those who struggle with literacy rates in order to obtain employment. So there are reasons in every country for dissent against the ruling elite. And if people were to come in as an NGO and tell people the reason why they're homeless is that there are billionaires in America hoarding the money, is that right? Is that just? Do you want to end that? Do you want to end poverty in America? Do you want to bring about regime change, system change, governmental change in order to promote a fair and more equitable society? Well, there is the breeding ground for bringing about a revolution against those in power. And if you were then to try and radicalize some of those people and give them weapons and tell them that you have their back should they militarily attack those in charge, well, then you have what could be called a people led revolution. But what you really have is a foreign inspired regime change operation, not in the interests of the people who pick up the guns and the arms, but in the interests of the people who want to see regime change, not for the benefit of the people, but so that they can become the new oligarchs, that they can replace the millionaires and billionaires in that state, that they can become the new ruling elite by proxy through financial theft and resource theft of the indigenous people's right to have their own money, which is then siphoned up towards those in charge and then out towards the coffers of the foreign corporations. So the war on Syria began in 2011 in Daria. There was an uprising of sorts against the state, which then very clearly became organized and armed, and then turned into an armed insurrection against the government of Bashar al Assad. Now, we saw the same thing in Ukraine in 2014, people claiming in Kiev that they wanted to join the European Union and that this was a revolution against an authoritarian, totalitarian government in the Ukraine. But as we all know now, with hindsight, these were fascists. These were the people who supported Bandera in the Second World War and the Nazi extermination of the Jews and the Gypsies and the socialists and the communists throughout Western and Eastern Europe. These people were simply cannon fodder for the CIA and MI6. Victoria Nuland bragged that they spent $5 billion bringing about regime change in Ukraine. So Ukraine had a democratically elected leader. He was deposed in what was basically a foreign inspired coup against a legitimate government, leading to fascists and neo Nazis taking control of Ukraine. Then the people in the Donbass said, whoa, 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 we didn't vote for fascism. In fact, 27 million Russian speaking people died to defeat Nazism in the Second World War. They refused to live under this neo Nazi enforced coup upon them. And they decided that they wanted to be independent and not be ruled by a foreign controlled cabal in Kiev. That led to the special military operation to protect those people in February 2022. So there is just one example of how the Americans and others destabilized Ukraine in order to put in a fascist regime which was pro EU and pro NATO and vehemently anti Russian. So if you look at Syria, 3 years before the coup, in 2011, you had this foreign inspired, financed, and armed insurrection against the government of Bashar al Assad. It was then facilitated by Turkey, who opened the borders. So between 50 and 60% of the people who claim to be fighting against President Bashar al Assad and indeed the secular Syrian Arab Republic are not Syrian. They are from Uzbekistan. They are Uyghurs from China. They are Takfiris from Saudi Arabia and other countries. So these people have come in. They are paid mercenaries. They were allowed to pour over the border from Turkey in order to establish a caliphate as such in Syria. They are the remnants of ISIS, which was started, I believe, by the CIA, MI6, and others to act as a Trojan horse within the Levant to use religious extremism in order to attack and destroy targeted nations. Like when after America and Britain had illegally occupied, bombed, devastated, and destroyed Iraq, these people then grew out of the remnants in order to prevent reunification of the Iraqi people and continue the balkanization and destabilization of Iraq. They wanted the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, I believe. It's maybe one of the names for ISIS potentially in the Levant. So moving forward to today, what have we seen in Syria in 13 years of destruction and destabilization? We've seen the Americans steal the oil. We've seen the Americans steal the wheat fields. So basically, through Caesar sanctions and other sanctions, they have destroyed the Syrian economy. They have forced starvation upon the Syrian people by stealing their food. So they've stolen their resources that would have been financing buildings and hospitals and schools, education projects. They have stolen their wheat, forced the Syrian government to import food, thereby further reducing its economic influence in the country. Then you had Turkey invade in order to support its Muslim Brotherhood offshoot, the HTS Al Nusra Front, in Idlib and Aleppo. So you had the Americans taking over part of Syria. Then you had the Turks taking over part of Syria. You've had the Israelis in the Golan Heights illegally occupying parts of Syria. And then you had these HTS, Al Nusra Front, ISIS, and indeed the Kurds. I understand the Kurds have a legitimate claim to nationhood. They claim to be socialists, and yet they can only exist in Syria with the backing of American imperialism. So, how any socialist group that should be opposed to Syria to imperialism can sit back and say we are going to free our land, but we're doing it with the backing of the Americans, uh, the kind of belly of the beast, the imperialist hegemonic superpower. And then they claim also to be a socialist organization which only wants to liberate Kurdistan, yet they are in Arab speaking non Kurdistan areas in Syria. So they in themselves have become colonial occupiers of land that is not seen to be part of Kurdistan, but is seen to be part of Syria. So you have this whole mismatch of everything that's going on and everything that's happening. Then you had a kind of de facto ceasefire along the engagement lines from 2017. You had the Iranians and you had Hezbollah come to the aid of the Syrian Arab Republic. They were asked to come to the aid of the Republic in order to defend it against this horde of head chopping, bloodthirsty thugs. One of their mantras was that Christians should go to Beirut and that the Alawites would go to the grave. I've just read something on social media that a journalist, Syrian journalist in Damascus, was asked yesterday, "Are you Christian, Druze, Alawite, or a fourth designation?" This shows you the sectarian nature of the people who have taken over Damascus, stopping people in the streets and identifying them. As well say, like the neo-Nazis said during the Second World War, are you Jewish? Are you a communist? Are you a socialist? Are you a gypsy? Or do you have mental health issues? Or are you indeed they suffer from physical disabilities? And these are all the people that were put in the gas chambers, put in the prisons, put against the wall, summarily executed. We're hearing of summary executions. We've witnessed all this in Aleppo, chop people's heads off, chop people's hands off. I saw vans where they picked up women and put them in caged vans as if they're taking them to the zoo, or animals being transported to an abattoir or indeed a farm. God alone knows what's going to happen to these women. Women's rights that all these neoliberals in the West are cheering for, uh, and are also cheering on this bloodthirsty, illegitimate coup within Syria, while they cry out for women's rights in Afghanistan. They have actually encouraged the conditions that are going to condemn women to much more than not having their rights, equal rights within society, but much, 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 much worse. Uh, we have seen that Turks take over more land in Syria. There are reports that the Israelis are up to 20 kilometers from Damascus. So what we could be witnessing is the balkanization of Syria, which has been a long-term plan by the Israelis. There was the Yinyon plan, I believe, which was going to balkanize Syria into an Alawite state along the coast, a Druze state somewhere based in the Golan Heights. There would be up to 4 separate balkanized areas in order to, and the Kurds, I believe, maybe be one of them, in order to make sure that Syria would never again stand as an intact nation and a threat and a continued threat to the imperialist Zionist project within the region. So indeed, the Israelis have flown between 300 and 400 sorties in order to destroy the remnants of the Syrian Arab army, but they're destroying helicopters, planes, army barracks, munitions centers, arms factories. This isn't to protect Israel. This is to make sure that Syria will never again pose a military threat to the Israelis. Syria has never, in the last decades, attacked the Zionist entity, and yet the Zionist entity, as we all know, has permanently been bombing and attacking and murdering people in Syria, including attacking the Iranian embassy in Damascus, bombing Syrian Arab army positions, and at times, along with the Americans, supporting these head chopping terrorists in their drive through Syria in order to destroy the regime. So I think if we just maybe go on to like why did President Assad leave? I've been in Syria a total of 5 times from 2010 onwards. I was on the Viva Palestina 5 medical aid convoy with George Galloway. We spent 15 days in Latakia before we were given permission by Mubarak and his security apparatus to enter Gaza on the 21st of October 2010. I remember the date because that's my birthday and it's stuck in my mind. I then went in through again in 2014 on a second convoy, Bradford to Gaza. This was when the war on Syria was at its height. On our way in a small limited convoy towards Damascus, there was a huge kind of backlog on the road. I assumed it was just rush hour traffic in the morning, people going to school, people going to work. But apparently, 2 roadside bombs or 2 aerial missiles had struck the motorway and killed many civilians. That was the hold up on the traffic. We then went as part of the convoy to donate blood because they'd put out a call for people to donate blood for the wounded and the injured. I then attended the World Federation Trade Union Congress 3 times in Damascus, and I met President Bashar al-Assad twice. The very first time, he shook the hands of all the international delegates, and I said to him he was an extremely brave man. Anybody else would have turned tail and run because of the pressure that Syria was under. He stayed in place and had no intention of going. That's why I'm surprised when he left and took up residency in Moscow. I believe had it solely been his choice and solely perhaps been the choice of the Syrian Arab army, he would have stayed in Damascus and kept fighting. I believe that he was maybe encouraged to go by the Russians and through a deal sponsored by Turkey. So I believe the Turks and the Russians behind the scenes, uh, maybe in conjunction or for the benefit, and the long term benefit of Israel and unfortunately America. I think they said to President Assad, uh, there's too many forces gained against you. The Americans are going to bomb you. The Israelis are going to bomb you. You can see this all happen after Lebanon. As soon as the ceasefire came in Lebanon, this had all been pre-planned. This didn't like somebody didn't wake up one morning and go right. Let's ramp up the attacks on the government forces in Syria. This has been planned probably since before October 7, 2023, waiting and biding their time. The Turks have been training and rearming. Apparently, the armaments these guys suddenly appeared with wasn't just machine guns on the back of pickup trucks. They had tanks, they had air support from Israel and from the Americans, and probably the Turks. There were special forces embedded for some of the attacks. So we saw the Syrian Arab army not defend Aleppo and not defend Hama and maybe not defend Homs. They pulled out in order to secure the positions outside of the cities. It seemed strange that maybe they've been caught on the hop. It's quite possible. But with hindsight, and now with a few days into this, it might appear that Assad had been convinced that the regime, the government as such, was going to fall. And now was the time to leave in order to protect civilian life. I have seen a 7 point plan document where people's rights are assured under the Constitution, that government institutions would be kept intact, that there would be no attack upon individuals associated with the government, and that their religious sites would all be saved. So if this document is true, and it was presented to the president, and he decided to leave, not to save his own life or that of his family, but to prevent widespread bloodshed in Syria, which ultimately he could not stop. I believe this is why he left, because he was told that there would be this peaceful transition of power to the opposition coalition. But when we look at what's happening, when someone is stopped in the street and basically asked what their religion is, that's very, very, very frightening. There are already reports of summary executions. These people that are involved in ISIS, HTS, the Muslim Brotherhood, backed by Turkey and America and Israel and others, they're not going to go into places and find ex Syrian army soldiers and say, it's okay, lads, the war's over, we're at peace. I sadly see the streets of Syria flowing with blood unless these people are reined in. I think they're going to rape the women. I think they're going to murder the men. I think they have not only the capacity but the intention of ethnically cleansing the Alawites and the Christians from Syria. Syria is one of the oldest capitals in the world. Babylon and Iraq is where civilization and the human race began. The human race began in West Asia and then spread across the globe. The destruction of Syria is going to have a huge impact upon the access of resistance. An IRGC commander general, retired not more than 8 weeks ago, tweeted that first it was Gaza and the West Bank, then it would be Lebanon, then it would be Syria, then it would be Iraq, then it would be Iran. And the Ayatollah Khamenei previously said exactly the same thing. Are we watching the domino effect that we saw in Latin America, government after government after government falling due to the financing and arming of terrorism within their countries by America? We're watching that right now happening in the Levant, happening in West Asia. Uh, I personally feel distraught that this bloodshed has been brought to Syria, one of the few Arab countries that is a bulwark against the Zionist project. So, Greater Israel is not just a dream that the Zionists want to see realized. We are watching it being born at this very moment. I don't know how much of Syria that the Israelis intend to steal, but are we going to go back to Lebanon? Or are we going to see a consolidation of power by these terrorist mercenaries who aren't even Syrian inside of Syria? And they are now on the Lebanese border and they are now on the Iraqi border. So will we see the Americans and the Turks and the Zionists suddenly say to these people, right, we want you to go into southern Lebanon, we want you to go into Iraq, a proxy war on behalf of Western imperialism, where Western soldiers aren't put at risk, but they'll have the support of the American Air Force, the Israelis, or the Turks? Are we going to have Muslim fighting Muslim instead of the resistance fighting Zionism? This is my fear going forward, and we can only pray that the least amount of violence is visited upon the people of Syria. But this isn't going to get better anytime soon, and those who wish to see an end to the Zionist state should never have supported the mercenary Takfiris, Wahhabis, and head choppers supported by the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, in Iraq, and further afield.